a group of investors wanted to develop the corner of Jones in California. And if one looks at a map of Nob Hill, there's an old topographical map that shows the grid of the city, but with the hills drawn in. And what you can see clearly on this map is that Nob Hill is the most western and southern of the hills in San Francisco. It's the only one that looks towards the Pacific and looks south the way it does unobstructed. So that might also be why they chose originally this hill instead of the other hills. And so what you have is about 8 square blocks that comprise the hilltop, and Jones in California is the most south and western of those blocks. So in a layout that's already prime real estate, Jones in California is cornerstone of it. So it makes sense that property developers would have said this is a place to put an important building and where people would want to live. So you have the group that developed this building that hired Weeks and Day. Weeks and Day had been practicing in San Francisco somewhat prolifically in the same era as Julia Morgan-Hurst and other important architects. They understood that buildings were characters not only in a city and its life, but in people who live in a building or work at a building and their lives. And you could see this even in a more dramatic case in their theaters that they did, like the Fox Movie Palaces, where the whole experience of someone coming and moving through and using that building at every single moment is orchestrated like a piece of music. A lot of people who live in apartments in this building have noted the ease of use of the layouts. The original layouts allowed people to circulate within their domain very easily, and the kind of common areas that we have, like the lobby, serve to knit people together because they're at a scale and have a kind of a grandeur that lifts everybody's spirits. I think firstly, the architecture of the building itself. If you look at a lot of corner buildings around San Francisco, you'll find that a lot of them try to make the entrance right on the corner. A lot of them then sort of have a flank that goes down one side of the corner, one street of the corner, and the building goes down the other street and are pretty nondescript. What they did here was to really start at the upper corner as a linchpin to the organization of the building and come across to the portico and build the portico facing California Street as the signature of this address, and to locate this building as being something that's on California Street, not really at the corner of Jones and California. So that address becomes important. It's the same way that on their other projects, the entry to the building is always a highlight. It draws your eye to it. You can see even today as people walk by or ride by on the tourist buses, they can't help but look at the building because the portico is there. And it has a scale, it has an importance, it communicates a whole set of details in fine little minutiae that really draw your eye, that draw your mind to it, that engage you. The whole building rises from that on the corner lot with its setback at the upper stories, and then with its small kind of castle at the top of it, the elevator head house, and overall maintains a kind of an urbanistic dignity that was less rare for buildings back in the time when it was created, but these days I think is very rare. In the case of this building, you have a funny set of details that they put on. There's clearly a conquistador with the helmet, which would speak to obviously the history of Spain's attempted colonization of this part of the country, which is the beginning of San Francisco. And then you have some elements like cornucopia that sort of tell of wellness and abundance and well-being, and of even Thanksgiving. And then you even have things like the small sort of cherub faces that speak of joy, I think. So as someone rides by on a tourist bus, they're getting this place is rooted in the history of California. It's about living life well, and it's about living life with joy. And that all comes from looking at the portico of the building.
There was a introduction to San Francisco put out by one of the local papers, and they were talking about all the special things of San Francisco. And we were listed as the most beautiful entryway in the entire city. They said that it looked like a chess set that had been tumbled together in the most gracious way possible.
If you look at the top of the building, it's obviously borrowing from a silhouette that is the silhouette that fortifications, that castles always had. And the way that they designed the head house is very much like a castle tower. It has the same sort of buttressed articulation. It has these sort of reinforced small triangular struts going up the side of it. This is a motif, it's a visual semiotic motif like they used on the portico that they put on that tower at the top. These little triangular struts that run up the side of the tower give you the idea of strength, give you the idea of permanence, because that top is also something that you can see from lots of locations all over the city. You can see the top of our building from 15, 20 blocks away. You go down to the top, 4 or 5 stories of 1201, which are the ones that are inset. Insetting like that gives more permanence to all the floors below, gives more of a posture of the building as being immovable from its location. When you look at our tower from 20 blocks away, or even from coming in from the airport, miles away, you can see it as this sturdy, permanent object on that hilltop. So what Weeks and Day I think we're doing was looking at putting this building, locating it in terms of time as something that has its roots in the early Spanish heritage of early California. Again, trying to give something roots that you can't deny. They thought about the portico, the floor of the portico, which you step up onto from California Street. When you're standing under the portico, you're standing on a tile pattern that incorporates this motif of heaven. So you have to put that in the family with the cherubs, the cornucopia, the conquistador. Again, there's a consistency in what they were trying to communicate to us about happiness in general, I think. And so that motif is there. Then when you come in through the door of the lobby, again, you don't realize it until you might have been sitting waiting for a friend to pick you up for a while, having a reason to stare at the ceiling in particular, that you'll realize that that 8-pointed star is embedded throughout the ceiling. So it's as if you're under the stars when you're in the lobby. And then those are punctuated, interspersed with another motif they chose, which is painted on, which is the California poppy. So again, something that is so rooted in California, something that when you drive through the hills, you always see, you always love, you're always thankful for, and that's embedded in the ceiling. The floor is terracotta, which is in keeping with old Spanish architecture and early mission architecture, and again is a material that gives you a feeling of rootedness and of things that don't change because it's made of the earth and it looks of the earth. When you go in our lobby, it has the feeling of a great hall because the central lobby is double height with that formed ceiling at the top, and there's the great mantle piece of what essentially would be the fireplace that you would come into. It steps down on either side from that to a very high single height, which has ornamental wooden beams and painted friezes on the ceiling woodwork. If you look closely at what they painted, there is on the vertical surface, there are bowls of fruit that signify abundance and wellness. And then all sorts of flora and fauna on the ceiling running across the flat surface of it. I remember the first time I came in was at night, so these amazing custom chandeliers that are hanging in the space that Wixon-Day designed were on, and all of those many small candelabra bulbs were glowing, which means that the ceiling was lit, and that as opposed to daytime when sometimes the light outside is so bright that as you come in, your eyes haven't adjusted yet, you kind of miss the ceiling. At night, I didn't miss it. And that's the first impression of the ceiling and of the scale of the space, the double height and the lower wings was amazing. And noticing then the fireplace mantle that kind of scales the double height and gives a sense of center to the room. And then just looking at all of the materials and the colors, and it was this whole symphony of detail that I thought was phenomenal. I like the fact that they distinguished coming in off the street from the moment at which you transition to the private realm, your approach to your own unit. So if one thinks of a lot of apartment buildings here and in other cities, you'll frequently come in off the street, dart across a lobby, and hit an elevator bank. And what they did here that's beautiful is they knew that you need time to come in from the street. You need time to decompress. You need sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 paces is a good amount to decompress. To begin to leave the street behind, to begin to leave your work day behind, to leave the party you were at behind. And then what they did is they did a sectional change. So you get to these little archways and you have to climb up the 4 or 5 steps. And that takes you to a kind of a pause. And the little elevator vestibule that we call the upper lobby is like that. It's like a comma in a sentence. And that's the beginning of your transition to the private realm. When people gather in the lobby, the scale of the space and all of these details that we've talked about, the tile floor, the glazed wall base, the painted wood beam ceiling, even the big double height mantle above the fireplace opening, all of those take on a character of sort of a noble backdrop. I think as you're talking to people and enjoying the company of your friends in the lobby, that's sort of another character that's present in the room. It's a character that's sort of part of the get-together. I always like to think that Wixon-Day are actually very much present in moments like that where everybody gets together. The fact that they felt it was so important to give the building the kind of stature that it has is expressed by the painting in the lobby that they asked their friend William Hastings to custom paint just for this building. The purpose being that it would be hung in the lobby. It's of a kind of a Scottish, early Scottish castle on a crag, on a hill. It's a pretty steep drop-off going south and west from this building. It was located by the developers right at the promontory of Nob Hill, where it really drops off the steepest. And the fact that they asked a friend who was an architect who was also a painter to make a sort of extra reminder of that in this poetic, kind of naive way with this painting of this old Scottish castle on the hilltop just helps to connect the dots. Wixon-Day were very conscious of establishing a clear, unobstructed rooftop, because If we take everything that we've thought about already, about this location, Johnson, California, on Nob Hill, being one of the prime overlooks, and then if you take them understanding that the building would have a couple of setbacks, that one of the setbacks would give residents on some of the upper floors their own private terraces that overlook the city. Then you go to the actual rooftop, the top of the whole building. They could have very easily distributed all of the mechanical equipment, the extraction fans, the elevator cables, power. They could have put all of these things all over the rooftop. They very clearly didn't. They were very purposeful in compacting it all into the small tower, the small 2-story tower that sits on top of the roof. That keeps the rooftop of 1201 completely open and unobstructed, which is a complete rarity, not only architecturally in multifamily buildings, but in fact a huge rarity in San Francisco. There are no other residential towers with a 360-degree walkable rooftop that has a balcony that overlooks the city from absolutely every angle. This is the only one. As you experience and you're standing there with the landscape of all of San Francisco around you, all the way to Twin Peaks, seeing all the way to the South Bay, looking all the way to Mount Diablo, and looking all the way up to Napa, you have this companion in that experience while you're up there, which is this little tempietto, this little castle on top of the building. In the actual parapet that surrounds the top of the building, it rises at certain points and has a rosette, which urbanistically from far away gives detail to the top of the tower as you look at it from across the city. But vice versa, being on the rooftop, looking back at that city, it's like a camera lens. And you can stand and you can look through that rosette that frames your view of the city. It frames your view, actually, using a motif from early Spain, a quatrefoil. So 1201 appears consistently on lists of the top 15 works of architecture in San Francisco. Even today, when we've had 100 years to build lots of other amazing buildings, this one still rises to the top. That's because of all this integrity that went into the design. I think it's also in thanks to the residents and the people who live in it and care for it and keep it up, because all of us feel, and residents talk about this amongst each other, they feel that we are taking care of a legacy. We're shepherding something. For the time that we're here, we're carrying it as best as we can and then handing it over to the next people. And I think this building hits these lists of the most important structures because so many people, in addition to the architects who designed it, have shown great care for it.
So the building has 16 residential floors. Originally, the building had 86 units, but over the years, units have been combined. So now we currently have 74 units. It is a co-op, something that over the years I learned is more popular in New York. But basically a co-op is a corporation to where individuals purchase in shares, and then in turn for our type of building, they get a lease for their unit. So you have to own the shares in order to be a member in this building. So we're going out to our back patio, and this patio was redone in 2005, and this is a place where a lot of our shareholders like to relax in the sun. They like to have wine, and so with this open concept, you can have a lot of activities and events back here, and it's a gorgeous place to have, especially as you see the bright sun. It's just gorgeous. Over the years, when I first started here, we actually had about 14 permanent staff members because we had full staff in our garage. We had garage attendants 24/7. We had elevator operators, which were 16 hours a day. We had full-time doormen 24/7. Is when we didn't have mailboxes, the doorman used to sort the mail. We were actually a sub post office.
I was in charge of all those first class mails, and we have a counter down there. We have to sort it, each one, and bundle it and put it in the basket. So the guy would deliver it to different floors in front of their door.
We have our 16 floors. We go up to our 17th floor, our roof deck, and this is a 360-degree view of the city. This is the perfect location to watch the Blue Angels.
You know how the Navy comes every once a year, the Blue Angels. It's the best seats in town. You cannot get a better view of the Blue Angels than the roof of the Cathedral Apartments.
And 4th of July, people love coming up here then. New Year's Eve, you see the fireworks. It's a beautiful place.